So Tal, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you to speak about a topic, happiness, that I think is the holy grail of every single person, how to live a happy life. Why happiness has become such a hot topic of conversation.
Yeah, so, happiness is a very hot topic of conversation today, though in a way it's been that way for thousands of years. So Aristotle, one of the fathers of Western philosophy, talked about happiness as human beings' highest end. Confucius, Lao Tzu talked about it. Religion speaks about it, happiness in this world, in the afterlife. But you're right in that today there's more conversation, whether it's in newspapers, whether it's in bars and just about everywhere. And the question is why? And I think the main answer is that today, for the first time, we have a science of happiness. So it's one thing philosophizing about happiness. It's one thing talking about how religion is related to happiness in this or the afterlife. But when you have a science of happiness that actually provides you real tools that you can use, that you can apply, whether it's to your own life, whether it's to your kid's life, whether it's in your organization, now that's different, and people are interested in that.
So there is one thing, and I'm happy that you introduced the concept and the idea of the science of happiness. When we think about happiness, when people think about happiness, they usually equate that state to achieving a goal or to experiencing pleasure now at the present. But is this the correct definition for happiness, or we should frame it in a different way?
Yeah, no, I think most people have a misunderstanding of what leads to happiness. So most people will tell you, yes, if I'm successful, I'll be happy, whether it's rich, whether it's famous, whether I achieve a certain goal at work, at home, if this woman or man says yes to me, if my objectives are fulfilled. Unfortunately, that's not the case, which is why you very often see very successful, very wealthy, very accomplished individuals who are very unhappy. Because everyone has told them, and they believe, that if you achieve a certain goal, if you get to this milestone, then you'll be happy. They get to that milestone, they achieve that goal, they make that amount of money, and they're still not happy. And now, not only are they not happy, they're also lost because they're disillusioned. Until now, at least, they had the illusion that when they get to a particular point, they'll be happy. They got there, they're not happy, they don't even have that illusion to sustain them. Achieving a goal doesn't make us happy, certainly not for the long term. Yes, we experience a spike in our levels of well-being, but it's short-lived. And there's research showing that lottery winners, people who've just made millions of dollars, it's their life dream come true, that they think they'll be happy for the rest of their lives. Within 3 months, they're back to where they were before, only more disillusioned. You find it with professors. Their whole lives, they've been striving to become tenured. They finally get tenured. They think they'll be happy for the rest of their lives. Well, that will last, a month or 6 at most. Getting to a particular point leads to temporary well-being, not to a permanent rise in happiness.
So, Tal, what does the science of happiness say about what makes us happy?
Yeah, so, the science of happiness tells us a lot of common sense things. Things that many of them my grandmother told me. But today we have the scientific backing for it. So for instance, relationships are the most important components of a happy life. You see it on an individual level. So there was research by the founder of positive psychology, Marty Seligman, and his colleagues on the happiest people in the world. What's unique about them? And what they found was that one of the two things that are unique about them is that they have strong, intimate relationships. And that could mean, of course, romantic relationships, but it could also mean friendships, family relationships, not perfect relationships, because in the most intimate relationships, we disagree, we fight, we have conflicts, but they have those relationships and they make them a priority in their lives. In today's world with, technology all around us and, soon within us, the relationships, real relationships, that is, not virtual ones, have taken a back seat. And that is unfortunately taken away from people's happiness. So relationships are very important for happiness. Something else that's key to happiness is gratitude, appreciation. Oprah talked about it back in 1999. There was no science behind it then. Today there is, showing that people who express gratitude on a regular basis, in other words, don't take for granted what they have. They don't ignore what the problems, the issues that they don't have. At the same time, they don't ignore what they do have. These people are not just happier, more optimistic, they're also more successful, more likely to achieve their goals, and they're physically healthier. So it actually strengthens our immune system when we focus on what is working in our life, what we are grateful for. My favorite word in English is the word appreciate. And appreciate means to say thank you for something. But there's another meaning to the word appreciate, and that is to grow in value. So, you put money in the bank, hopefully it appreciates, you have more of it. And the two meanings of the word appreciate are connected. Because when you appreciate the good in your life appreciates. You have more of it. And once again, this is not just an etymological language connection. There is actually scientific evidence showing that when I appreciate my partner, when I appreciate my children, when I appreciate my work, my life, the good things in my life actually appreciate, and I have more of them.
Tal, there is, speaking about friendship, but I would say human relationships in general, that it's a very beautiful idea that you mentioned, and I would like you to elaborate a bit more, and it's the concept of the beautiful enemies. Mm-hmm.
So the phrase beautiful enemy comes from the writing of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is a North American philosopher from the 19th century. And what he wrote in his essay on friendship is that in a friend, he's not looking for a mush of concessions, a person who will agree with everything that he says. Rather, what he's looking for is a person who will challenge him, who will push him, who will be a beautiful enemy and help him in his apprenticeship to the truth. And if you think about it, what are you looking for in a friend? Are you looking for a yes man or a yes woman, a person who will agree with everything? Yes, sometimes we need a pat on our back, someone who will say, yes, we're great no matter what. But in the long term, we're looking for someone who's real, who'll tell us when they disagree, who'll challenge us, who'll help us in our apprenticeship to the truth, in becoming a better person, in becoming more successful, in becoming happier. And it's that person who's a true friend to us, not a person who just blindly agrees with everything that we say. This also relates to relationships. There's a lot of research on romantic relationships. And what it shows is that in the long term, to sustain happiness in a relationship, you must have conflicts as well. So if you agree about everything, I'm not talking about the honeymoon phase where everything is great and our partner is perfect. When they stop being perfect, when we stop being perfect, that's when you need a beautiful enemy. And conflicts actually help bring the relationship to a higher level, as well as bring the individual to a higher level. There's a wonderful writer by the name of David Schnarch, who in his book, Passionate Marriage, talks about how marriage, or any long-term relationship for that matter, is a people-growing machine. And the way we grow is through the conflict, through the disagreement, through having a beautiful enemy. Because it's not enough just to be an enemy, just to have conflict. Needless to say, you also need to have fun together, you need to have experience joy together. But it's having the both, the beautiful and the enemy, that leads to the most long-term happiness.
Tal, apart from the conflict, there is this idea that having these, let's say, negative emotions, let's say sadness, let's say angriness, that keeps us away from happiness. And one of your ideas is that, in fact, those feelings help us on the road of happiness. And I would like you to explain what's the role of feeling bad, let's say, in achieving a more fulfilling, more happier life.
Good. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is such an important part of a happy life. So when I first started teaching this course at Harvard, I had 8 students in my class. 2 of them dropped out, which left me with 6 and a bit of a broken, bruised ego. But I remember one day I went for lunch, and a student who wasn't in my class came over and said to me, "Tal, I join you for lunch?" And I said, "Sure." So he came and he sat with me, and then he said, Tal, I hear you're teaching a class on happiness. And I said, yeah, positive psychology. And he said, my roommates are taking your class. They were 2 of the 6 students. And then he said to me, but Tal, now that you're teaching your class on happiness, you've got to be careful. And I said, why? And he said, Tal, you've got to watch out. And I said, how come? And he said, because if I see you unhappy, I'll tell my roommates. And I actually used that in class the following day. And I said to my students, all 6 of them, I said, the last thing in the world that I want you to think is that I'm always happy. Or that you, by the end of this year, this was a year-long class, that you will experience a constant high. In fact, there are only 2 kinds of people who don't experience painful emotions, such as anger or sadness or anxiety or disappointment or envy or fear. 2 kinds of people who don't experience painful emotions. The first kind are the psychopaths. They do not really experience painful emotions. The second kind of people who do not experience painful emotions are dead. So, if you experience painful emotions, it's actually a good sign. It means you're not a psychopath and you're alive. We can build on that. But the problem today, and it really is a serious problem, is that people believe, as you said, that to be happy, you have to be happy all the time.
Yeah.
That if once in a while you experience sadness or anxiety or envy towards your best friend or fear, it means that something's wrong with you. There's everything right with you. There'd be something wrong with you if you didn't experience these emotions. And when we reject these emotions, here is the paradox, they actually get stronger, they intensify. Whereas if we allow these emotions to flow through us means by shedding tears, it means by speaking to our best friend about it, it means by writing a journal and expressing our emotions. By allowing these emotions to flow through us, they're actually more likely to go away. And we're more likely to open ourselves up to the pleasurable, joyful emotions.
I always have this feeling that we are living in an age of emotional perfectionism, that we always have to be happy, we always have to feel good, smile, and it's so artificial.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So about just over 10 years ago, in one semester, I had 2 students write or 1 year, I had 2 students write a thesis with me. One of them wrote about physical perfectionism, and the other wrote about emotional perfectionism. And I found it interesting, and I connected it then thanks to the students, how related they are. So the one who wrote about physical perfectionism wrote about what are the covers of magazines doing to us? The pictures, the Photoshop pictures, what are they doing to mostly women, but increasingly more and more men, about what they need to look like in the eyes of the outside world. And the other student wrote about what do all these smiles, whether it was, that was the beginning of Facebook, but on Facebook, what do you see? See, everyone's smiling, everyone's doing great. Well, but except for me, because I'm sad sometimes, and I'm not doing well, but I'm not going to put that picture on my Facebook because I don't want to reveal my shortcoming. And we're getting to the stage where we think that the norm is everything is great, everyone is living happily ever after, except for me. And the kind of pressure that it's putting on people is leading to so much unhappiness. And that's why we're reading. I mean, just yesterday, a new study came out showing about the rising levels of depression among teenagers. We see these studies coming out all the time, unprecedented rates of unhappiness, of depression, of anxiety. So much of it is because we do not give ourselves what I've come to call the permission to be human, the permission to experience painful emotions, because they're a natural part of any life, even a happy or especially a happy life.
I mean, I think here is a huge topic because especially with teenagers that are the generation that has, most of them have born and rise with the internet and the smartphone. So they live like in this, I would call it, digital bubble of happiness. And this leads us to a topic that has also been very controversial, and is how technology, that it's so important in our lives, in our everyday lives, is helping us really to be happier or not. I mean, what's the role between the relationship between technology and happiness?
Yeah, so the analogy that I would use to understand the role of technology, or the value judgment that we assign to technology, is of electricity. Is electricity good or bad? Well, it depends. If I use electricity to bring light and to help someone on a life-supporting machine, then electricity is good. But if I use electricity to electrocute an innocent person, then it's not good. So it's the same with technology. Technology in and of itself is a power, it's a force. It can be used for good or ill. So, I recently was contacted by Sean, who was my best friend when I was between the age of 10 and 12. We hadn't been in touch since. We went to different countries, but he was in touch. Thanks to technology, we're in touch now. A wonderful thing. My sister married a wonderful man. They met through technology. At the same time, technology, we know, is also leading to much unhappiness. For example, there's research showing that the more hours people spend at any age on the internet, social networks, the more lonely they are. Loneliness is the number one predictor of depression. So when you do too much of technology and you forego other important things, such as real relationships, such as regular movement, physical exercise, you pay a very high price in terms of happiness. So as in many things in life, it's all a question of moderation. And by moderation, for us, we have 3 kids. So for our kids, they're limited in terms of the technology, both in terms of the content, but also no less important in terms of the quantity, not just quality, but also quantity of time that they spend in front of the screen. And we limit ourselves too. For instance, when we get home in the evening and we get together for a family, there's no technology. Phones are off, TV is off, computer is off. We're present.
Tal, you have traveled the world speaking about happiness. What's the main reason of unhappiness that you have found in people?
Yeah, so there are a few reasons to unhappiness. One of them is false expectations of what it is that will lead to happiness or what happiness looks like. In terms of what it is that will lead to happiness, people expect that it will be goals, achievements that will make them happier. In terms of their expectations of what a happy life looks like, it's in terms of a life that is devoid of painful emotions. So these two things are barriers to happiness. In addition, technology in that it takes away people from the real connection. I'll share with you a study that points this out. So this was done by Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize winner in economics, but actually a psychologist who did a lot of research on well-being. And what Daniel Kahneman researched was he wanted to understand what is the emotional landscape of a professional women's life. The emotional landscape of a professional women's life, and he looked at North America as well as Europe. And what he wanted to understand was how are these women feeling when they're at work, when they're with their partner, when they are with their kids, when they're shopping, when they're having lunch, whatever they're doing, how do they feel? And by the way, the results of this study apply to men as much as it does to women. But the most interesting finding in that study was that these women, whether it was in Europe or in the US, did not particularly enjoy spending time with their kids. Now, this was a surprising result because when he delved deeper, it wasn't that they didn't love their kids. For most of these women, the kids were probably the most important part of their life. What was it then? It was that when these women were with their children, they were not really with their children, meaning they were physically there, but at the same time they were on the phone or texting or doing work or thinking about what they did in the past or what they have to do in the future. They weren't present. And when all these things came together, they may have been really happy just being with their kids or just being on the phone with a friend or just working. But when all these things came together, it was too much of a good thing, and quantity of activities affected quality of experience. And this is what's happening to us in our modern world, where more and more people are not present, are not mindful in their day-to-day, in what they're doing. And you see it in the US, you see it in Europe, you see it in China, you see it in Australia. And people are not able to enjoy the wealth of potentially happiness generating activities in their lives because they're not present.
Tal, I'm sure that they have asked you this question thousands of times. Can happiness be learned? Can a person learn to be happy, to live a more happy life?
God, I hope so. Now I often tell my students that I'm the right person to teach happiness. Why? Because I wasn't born with happy genes. I got into this whole field of the study of happiness because of my own unhappiness. Otherwise, I started off as a computer scientist, probably be, coding today rather than reading academic journals. So yes, the answer is we can absolutely change our levels of happiness. It's not easy. Also, some of it is genetic. However, a lot of it is about the choices that we make in life. And when I say choices, I don't just mean the grandiose, large choices such as, who do I choose to spend my life with? Or what kind of work do I find? How do I spend, my week? It's the small decisions, such as right now, do I decide to be grateful for being where I am? I am grateful, thank you. So, or do I choose to go out for a run or for a walk? Do I, when I'm with my best friend, switch off the phone and am just with my best friend? These are small decisions and they add up because, there's one step and another step and another step, and that adds up to the path of your life.
But you have this beautiful idea of the rituals and how important rituals are to help us have a happier life. And I would like you to elaborate a bit more that idea.
Yeah, so when it comes to bring about change, it turns out that philosophy had it wrong and religion had it right. And I'll explain. So 2,500 years ago, Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, said that to know the good is to do the good. In other words, when I know that something is good, is right, is just, is moral, then I will do it automatically. Unfortunately, though Socrates was a very smart man, unfortunately in this case he was wrong. Because if to know the good was enough to do the good, we'll all be eating only healthy food, would always be calm and lovely and nice to everyone around us, and we would just do the right thing. But we don't always do the right thing, and we often do things that we later regret. Because to know the good is not necessarily to do the good. Religion, on the other hand, had it right. Religion understood that in order to bring about change, it's not enough just to know something conceptually, cognitively, that what we need to do is practice it over and over and over again, to say it over and over and over again. This is why prayer, you say the same prayer, whether it's thanking God for your daily bread or for being alive, you do it on a daily basis or at least once a week, because repetition is key, ritualizing is key. And today there's research showing, I think theologians didn't have that research, but maybe, God knows everything, so he knew that research thousands of years ago. And that is that when you repeat something over and over again, it actually changes your neural pathways. I'll give you the example of one of the first studies that were done in this area. This was done in London. So new taxi drivers in London had to memorize the map of London. Now, memorizing the map of London is a lot more difficult than memorizing the map of New York. Map of New York, you need to be able to count, essentially, and then you know it. In London, it's an old city, or an older city, and the streets are intricate and complex, and it's like a maze. So for months, this is pre-GPS days, for months, taxi drivers had to memorize every street of London. And what they found was that within this period, the part of the brain associated with visualization, the visual cortex, actually became bigger. Why? Because they studied over and over and over again, day in and day out, and the part of the brain, the neural pathways became thicker. So our brain changes as a result. This is what it means for something to become second nature. Rafael Nadal, how many forehands did he have to hit before it became second nature? Now, he doesn't need to think about the ball coming and him taking the hand out and hitting. He just does it. Why? Because he's been doing it over and over and over again. And it's the same with any habit. You know, there's a French/Tibetan monk, Mathieu Ricard, who asks the following question. He says, when he tries to get people to meditate on a regular basis, and we know that meditation helps, he says, people tell me that they don't have time, but can you play Mozart's sonata without practicing hundreds and thousands of times, sometimes for years to get to a high level? You cannot. Why do you hope that to be happy, to form habits of happiness? Why do people think that you just need to understand what it's about and then do it? You can't swim just by learning the theory. You have to practice. And it's the same with psychological change. If you want to become a more grateful, you have to practice on a regular basis, create a ritual, such as every night or at least once a week, to express gratitude for the things in your life. Over time, those neural pathways associated with gratitude, with looking to appreciate the world, they will strengthen and it will become second nature to you. Just as it may be right now second nature to you to focus on the things that you don't have and the things that are missing in your life. So we in a sense, we sculpt our brain through rituals, and we sculpt it, if we repeat positive action, in a positive direction.
Tal, what rituals or what has worked for you on building your own road of happiness?
Right, so I'll give you a few examples. One example is, we know that regular physical exercise, as little as 30 minutes 3 times a week, not that much, of aerobic exercise or interval training, high intensity interval training, but 30 minutes 3 times a week doesn't just make us healthier, it actually makes us happier. In fact, it's the equivalent of our most powerful psychiatric medication. Physical exercise works in the same way as psychiatric medication. It releases norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine in your brain. So I have a ritual where 3 times a week, no matter what, I exercise. Even if I travel, I exercise. Even if I'm exhausted, I exercise. Another ritual is every night before I go to sleep, I express gratitude. I write things for which I'm grateful. Another ritual is I have a weekly date with my wife. Now, many people, many of our friends say to us, come on, a weekly date, a ritual? That's so unromantic. What about spontaneity? And I say to them, really? Spontaneity? We have 3 little kids and both of us working. Spontaneity? We'd go on a date once a year maybe, right? So we have a ritual around our relationship. We have rituals as a family, when we get together for dinners on a regular basis. And these are so important. I have a negative ritual as well. In the past, every morning when I woke up, I used to check the news because I'm a news junkie. The problem is that before I knew it, an hour and a half had gone and I was still reading the news, whereas my best time to write is in the morning. So I created a negative ritual. Do not open the news in the morning, and put in a positive ritual, do your writing in the morning. And I get to the news in the afternoon. And if overnight while I was asleep, the world had come to an end, someone will let me know about it. So it's okay to miss the news that very moment.
Tal, we now both agree that happiness can be learned and that we can incorporate rituals to help us have a happier life. Why schools don't teach this to students?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's something that I think about a lot. And in fact, we have created a program that we're introducing in schools, but it's only a drop in the sea. Marty Seligman, whom I mentioned earlier, the father of the positive psychology network of scholars, often talks to parents and teachers, and he asks them 2 questions. He asks them, first question, what would you like for your children? What's most important for you for your children? And parents say, well, we want our children to be happy, and we want our children to have good relationships, and we want them to be resilient, be able to overcome difficulties and hardships, and we want them to find joy and meaning in life, and all these wonderful things. And he makes a list of all the things that the parents write that they want for their children. Then he said, okay, list number 1 is over. Let's move on to list number 2, question number 2. What do your children learn in school? Math, writing, geography, history, and there is almost no overlap between the 2 lists. Now, it's not that list number 2 is not important. It's very important to learn mathematics and science and history and to learn how to write. Of course, these things are important. But why are schools almost entirely ignoring the first list? Especially today, given that we have a science of happiness. Now, I could understand, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, where schools would have been reluctant to introduce a particular person's idea of what is happiness, because, who knows if it will work. Today we have science, we can test, and what we're doing actually right now, as we speak, we're testing all these interventions in schools, and what we're finding are remarkable effects. In fact, right now, as we speak, we're in schools testing the impact of a positive psychological intervention. And what we're finding is quite interesting, because what we're finding is, yes, the students are becoming happier, more resilient, they're enjoying better relationships. We're finding that conflict and violence in schools is going down as a result of this intervention. And interestingly, their grades are improving. So we don't just become happier, we also become smarter when we focus on that first list. It's positively affecting the second list as well.
Tal, a teacher that wants to help students in achieving this more meaningful, happier life, in order to do this, does he need to rethink the curriculum? I mean, do we need to rethink school education in order to incorporate this?
Ideally, yes. I think we should rethink what schools are about, what they provide students, because we already know that the world of tomorrow, or even the world of 5 minutes from now, is going to be very different from the world of now. So, teaching in the way that historically was taught just becomes obsolete very, very quickly. And what we need to do is we need to teach the timeless technique. So it's always been important for people, as I mentioned, since Aristotle and Confucius, it's been important for people to pursue happiness. Let's talk about that. Relationships have always been important. They'll also be important 1,000 years from now. So we need to focus on that. Creativity, innovation is becoming more and more important by the day. It will be important 10 years from now and probably 1,000 years from now. How do we help people become more innovative? And we know that there are tools and techniques. By the way, one of them is if we increase positive emotions, if we increase people's experience of happiness, they become more creative. They're more likely to think outside the box. So all these things need to be taught. Ideally, politicians and educators need to get together and rethink what modern education looks like, incorporating that first list of relationships, meaning happiness, resilience, and so on. However, even in a classroom, in a traditional classroom, a teacher can bring about a great deal of change. And the first thing to do is to lead by example. Mahatma Gandhi said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." First of all, if my teacher pursues something that is meaningful for her, for him, I'm more likely to also look for something that is meaningful for me. If my teacher gives himself the permission to be human and talks about their failures, their disappointments, then that's leading by example, that's teaching by example. I'm more likely to give myself the permission to be human. So this is the first rule of great teaching. It's the first rule of great leadership. It's a great rule of great parenting. Be the change you want to see in those around you.
This is what you used to do at your Harvard classes, because you have a very successful Harvard class on positive psychology. I mean, what kind of techniques, Tal, you use to teach to your students? What kind of activities?
Good. So it's a few things. First of all, it's all based on research. So it was an academic class. It wasn't a self-help seminar. So they would be exposed to the latest and greatest, so to speak, research in the area of psychology in general. That's one. Second, I taught by example, meaning everything that I taught, I also tried myself. So if I taught about gratitude, I would share my gratitude journal with the students. If I spoke about physical exercise, they knew that I was in the gym, and they often saw me in the gym. If I talked about journaling, then obviously I told them that I journal, and sometimes I shared the things that I felt comfortable sharing from my journal. So everything was by example. And third, it was through stories. I'm a great believer in stories. So you need the research, you need the science, but then find a story to tell. So, for example, when I tell the story of the permission to be human, I would tell a difficult experience that I went through last night, that, I was disappointed that I was turned down when I submitted an article to a paper, and how disappointed and sad I was. So I would give examples, and I would give stories of myself as well as of others. And finally, it was all about action, about ritualizing what they learned. The gyms became a great deal busier when I was teaching my class. I know that many of the students still, till today, years later, keep a journal. So it was a real emphasis on action. So it was all scientific, it was about personal examples, it was about stories, and it was about ritualizing what they learned.
Tal, I want to go back a little bit. When you were explaining this research Martin Seligman did, asking to parents what they want their children to be. And as you said, probably the first answer is I want my kids to be happy. Mm-hmm. But as you know, because you are a parent of three, a father of three, you know that not always, what is best for your kids is what makes them happy. So parents have to always deal with this tension. So how can they deal with this tension
Good.
And also raise happy kids?
Yes. The first thing that's important for parents, for all of us to understand, is what is happiness. Happiness is not when you're smiling all the time or when everything is tensionless. In fact, when we try and make things too easy for our kids because we want them to be happy, and we really do want them to be happy, but when we make it too easy for our kids, we're not helping them, certainly not in the long term. Think about this analogy. Let's say you go to the gym because you want to develop muscle, and you look at the lightest weight, which is actually a feather, and you go like this. That's not going to make you stronger. It's not going to get you anywhere. It's the same in life. If things are too easy, you don't get stronger. You don't build resilience. And resilience, we know, is critical for life in general, certainly for children. So trying to make things too easy in the short term is often a bad long-term investment. And what parents need to do is find the right balance between, on the one hand, allowing kids to cope, to deal with difficulties and hardships, and at the same time, not put them in a place where they're not able to cope with something and they collapse or break down. And it's a fine line. This is why the child psychologist Donald Winnicott talks about the good enough mother. He doesn't talk about the perfect mother. There is no perfect mother. There's no perfect father. The good enough. Good enough is about making mistakes as a parent, and that's okay. But always moving between too easy and too hard, and trying to find that fine line that exists, which develops the child while supporting the child. Now, it's also important for parents to understand that happiness is not just about pleasurable emotions. Happiness is also about meaning, and sometimes to do something that is meaningful requires hard work and dedication and sacrifice. And that's okay. That's an important characteristic, hard work to model as a parent and also to require. Happiness is about cultivating relationships, which is why it's important for parents to model relationships, whether it's among the parents, whether it's with the children, whether it's with friends, and to model real relationships. So when parents understand happiness in its full context, they realize that they can provide their children a rich and a fulfilling life, not just by gratifying their immediate needs, which actually will hurt them more than it will help them. So, when I see parents who buy their kids everything that they want, who go and deal with all the kids' problems in school for them, that's not healthy. for the children. The children need to learn how to stand on their 2 feet. Just like literally, when a child walks, the parent is not always there holding them. They let them fall as well. That's how kids learn. They need to also learn, allow them to deal with difficulties and hardships in their life.
So Tal, what 3 advices, tips would you give to parents?
The first advice that I would give is advice that comes from the Italian educator Maria Montessori. And her idea basically was that we should not do for the kids what they can do for themselves. In other words, if a kid is struggling with, tying their shoes, obviously we can do it faster, and sometimes when we're late for work, we need to do it for them. But if we have the time and we can, just let them do it for themselves. If the kid is really struggling, putting something together or opening something, let them struggle. It's okay. So that's the first thing that I would say. Allow them to struggle. If they can do something by themselves, let them do it, and err on the side of them doing too much rather than too little, or rather err on the side of you doing too little rather than too much. Hands-off parenting as much as possible. Second thing is unconditional love. Now, this is a very much misunderstood concept of unconditional love. Unconditional love doesn't mean that the kid is always right and they get whatever they want, and no. It means that we accept their emotions unconditionally, but we put very clear boundaries on their behavior. So for example, a kid can feel anything. They can feel hatred toward their little brother or little sister because they took their attention from them, and that's legitimate. And they can feel anger towards you, and that's legitimate. However, there are very clear boundaries on their behaviors. They cannot hit their little brother or little sister, and they cannot throw tantrums and prevent you from having dinner at night. They can do that, but in their room. So there are clear boundaries on behaviors, but unconditional acceptance for their emotions. Give them the permission to be human. And finally, the third thing is once again, lead by example. So, when I come home, I often share with my kids my experiences, and I share with them both my wonderful experiences and my painful experiences. Kids do not need a perfect role model. They need a human being as a role model. And they look up to us as parents, and what we do very often matters a great deal more than what we say.
Tal, we have talked a lot about the importance of relationships in happiness, but there is an idea that you mention a lot that also it's very important in this having this fulfilling life, and it's finding a project that resonates with us, finding that work that we love doing. And in fact, in one of your books, Happier, you introduce this process, the MPS process. And I would like you to explain briefly what's that MPS process about. And
so finding something that is meaningful for us to do, ideally, our work will all be, meaningful and enjoyable for us. But even if we experience just an hour or two a day, or even 2 hours a week of doing something that is meaningful to us, that can go a long way. And I introduced the MPS process. The M stands for meaning, the P stands for pleasure, the S stands for strength. And I asked people to make a list of all the things in the world that are meaningful to them. So it's meaningful for me to talk to people, to help people. It's meaningful for me to do mathematics. It's meaningful for me to write, whatever it is, to spend time with kids, to walk on the beach. What's meaningful to you? And then they make a list. And then I ask them to make a list of all the things that are pleasurable, that are enjoyable to them. I enjoy solving equations, and I enjoy chatting with people. I enjoy being by myself. What do I enjoy? What gives me pleasure? And finally, what am I good at? What are my strengths? Maybe mathematics, maybe writing, maybe speaking in front of an audience, whatever it is. Make a list of my strengths. And then I asked them to find the overlap among these 3 circles. What's meaningful to me, what's pleasurable to me, and what are my strengths? And when I find the overlap, that overlap is where I can find the most happiness in my life. So, if I can give you a personal example. So, doing research is really a strength of mine. So I do research, and I've done good research in my life. It's also very meaningful to me, research. I think it makes a difference in the world. It can make the world a better place. But it doesn't give me pleasure to do the research, which is why I chose to focus less on research as I continued in academia. Music provides me a great deal of meaning in my life, a great deal of pleasure. But you don't want to hear me sing. It's not my strength, which is why I didn't choose a career in music. On the other hand, teaching, very pleasurable to me. I love it. It's also very, very meaningful to me, and I'm also good at it, which is why this is what I chose to do with my life, to focus my time on teaching. And doing this exercise, whether it's for the macro decisions in our life, such as what's my career, or even the micro decisions, such as, how do I want to spend my vacation? Asking these three questions can be very helpful in terms of raising levels of awareness about where we want to be and what will provide us the most happiness.
Now that we are more, let's say, in the work environment, I would like also to talk with you about the importance of incorporating failure and the role of failing in increasing our resilience, increasing our self-esteem, increasing our happiness.
Yeah, so there's a lot of research on failure, and basically what it's showing is that the most successful people, whether it's in business, whether it's in art, whether it's in science, are also the people who have failed the most times. So, for example, you see it with the top artists, the Michelangelos, the Da Vincis in the world, as well as the top scientists, the Marie Curies or the Thomas Edisons of the world. They're also the artists and the scientists who have failed the most times. Thomas Edison once said, "I failed my way to success." So you see it there. You also see it with leaders. So when you study the biographies of leaders, the most successful leaders today are those who have experienced the most failure yesterday. Whether it's as kids, whether it's in the workplace. I'm just reading a lovely biography of Amazon or Jeff Bezos called the Everything Store. And there's a story in there about a group of three executives in Jeff Bezos' Amazon just after the internet bubble exploded. So Amazon stock went down significantly and they weren't doing well. And they were actually talking about, should we stay on this boat, on this ship? And they got into a room and they made a list on the board of all the successes that Jeff Bezos had and all the failures. And the list of the failures was far, far longer than the list of successes. And yet today we know where Amazon is. One of the mantras that I repeat over and over again to myself and my students is learn to fail or fail to learn. Because there is no other way to learn. That's how we learn how to walk, by falling down. That's how we learn how to write, by scribbling. That's how we learn how to eat, by making a mess. That's how we learn how to shoot a basket, by missing. That's how we learn how to become better leaders or better partners or better parents. Learn to fail or fail to learn. So we see it on an individual level, also on an organizational level. The most successful organizations today are ones that provide what Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School calls psychological safety. Psychological safety is the feeling that that team members have that it's okay to fail, that it's okay to make mistakes, that it's okay to admit, I erred, that you learn from it as an individual, as a group, as an organization. And in organizations that allow for this psychological safety become learning organizations. They continue to grow, to learn, and ultimately to succeed.
Tal, to put an end, there is a topic, you have already mentioned that, it's the relationship between meditation and happiness. Because if we live in this age of emotional perfectionism, we also live in an age where, mindfulness it's one of the hot topics. So I know that you practice, I don't know if you still do. I know that you practice transcendental meditation. And I would like to know what's the connection between meditation, mindfulness, and happiness, and how can we incorporate that into our lives to make our lives more happy? I don't know how it works for you.
Yes, so meditation is an important component of happiness, and meditation essentially is about being present. Now, the thing is that we can practice meditation sitting down, with our, back straight, eyes closed, hands in this position, or sitting, crossing our legs, and that's great. That's important. However, we can also practice meditation in a more general context. For example, when I'm speaking with someone, if I'm present, I'm practicing a form of meditation. If I'm at work and I experience what psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi calls flow, meaning I'm in the moment, and suddenly I notice that 3 hours have gone by. That's a form of meditation. So learning to be present, whether in a formal way or in an informal way, that contributes a great deal to happiness. As you mentioned, we live in an age of distraction, when we're constantly pulled in different directions, and that prevents us from enjoying the here and now. So Tara Bennett Goldman writes in a wonderful book on emotional alchemy. She talks about how we can have everything. We can have all the money in the world. We can have the perfect lover. We can have the perfect work, and yet not enjoy any of it. At the same time, we may have a piece of bread. We may be next to our friend and be fully present to the experience and be very joyful and happy. So it's the presence of mind and heart that is a key component of happiness. Without it, it's very difficult to be happy. And just like with physical muscles, we can practice our concentration muscles by practicing meditation, by putting time aside, whether it's a half hour or if we have 5 minutes, then we do the 5 minutes of meditation. Personally, what I mostly practice today is yoga, that I've found is also good for body and for mind. And it is one of the activities that I introduced into my life that has positively transformed my experience for the better.
Tal, to put an end now, yes, to this conversation and to sum up all the ideas that we have talked about, what 3 ideas, 3 advice, tips would you like to share?
So with your permission, more than 3, but they'll be brief. So first, relationships, the number 1 predictor of happiness. And we talk about relationships, it's not virtual relationships, it's real face-to-face, intimate, deep relationships. Second, the importance of simplifying our life. We're so distracted, so it's simplifying, whether it's by sitting down for meditation or by spending quality time with a friend, or by reading, but just doing one thing. So single tasking to some extent rather than multitasking. These times during the day, I call them islands of sanity. And it's very important to have these islands of sanity in our crazy busy world. Physical exercise is critical for happiness, and it's not that much. 3 times a week, 30 minutes each time of aerobic or high intensity interval training is enough. Give ourselves the permission to be human. So allow the painful emotions to flow through us, whether it's by talking to someone about it, whether it's by shedding a tear, whether it's by keeping a journal. Express gratitude, appreciate what you have. We think we live one life, but actually we live an infinite number of lives, because at every moment there are infinite choices. And if we make the choice to be grateful, our life will most likely take a more positive path. We're choosing gratitude, we're choosing to be happy. So express gratitude, whether it's by keeping a journal, whether it's by sharing it with our family around the dinner table once a week. And finally, find as many activities as we can that provide us both meaning and pleasure. So even an hour at the end of a long day of doing something that is meaningful and pleasurable to us, engaging in our hobby, spending time with someone, that can go a long way in creating a happier day. And as day follows day, also a happier life.
Tal, thank you so much. Definitely having this time with you, speaking with you, have made my day happier.
Thank you.